I want to talk to you now about the law of contribution. And the law of contribution basically says growing yourself enables you to grow others. In other words, if I can grow me, I can grow the people around me. And this is a great law because it now talks about what am I doing to make a difference in people's lives? What am I doing to add value to people? I read a statement recently that said, if you're not doing something with your life, it really doesn't matter how long it is. I mean, it's just kind of like, so it's over. I love this when we think of the law of contribution. This story of the wealthy Texan, it's kind of a ridiculous story, but it's fun. So this wealthy Texan died, and his attorney gathered the entire family for the reading of the will. And relatives came from far and near to see if they were included in any of the bequest. So the lawyer somberly opened the will and began to read. To my cousin Ed, I leave my ranch, and to my brother Jim, I leave my money market accounts, and to my neighbor and good friend Fred, I leave my stock. And finally to my cousin George, who always sat around and never did anything but wanted to be remembered in my will, I want to say, hi, George. Oh, let's talk about contribution, okay? Two people really influenced me in my younger years on becoming a contributor to life. One of them, of course, was my father, who is still alive and is a marvelous person. And the other was when I was in college, I read a lot on Benjamin Franklin. And Benjamin Franklin asked two questions every day that really impacted me. When I wrote the book Intentional Living, I thought a lot about him and about his impact on my life, because his two questions every day were this. He would ask himself in the morning, what good shall I do today? And in the evening, what good have I done today? And he asked those two questions repeatedly. And what I would say in the law of contribution is this. If you want to do more, you have to become more. So when people talk about the fact that they would really like to leave a legacy, when they would really like to add value to people in an incredible way, I again talk to them, and as I say, you've got to become more. If you become more, you can add value to people and do more for others. One of my mentors in my 20s, 30s, was a gentleman by the name of Les Parrott. And he was a wonderful guy, and he really taught me a lot. And he had written a few books, probably 5 or 6 books. And one day we were having a discussion. I hadn't written any books. Not only hadn't written any books, never thought about writing a book. Writing was never at all on my list of things I wanted to do. And so I asked him, I said, Les, why do you write books? And he looked at me and said, John, I write books to influence people that I'll never get to physically know. And the moment that he said he wrote books to influence people that he would never know, I looked at him and I said, I'm going to write. My desire to write had nothing to do with writing. In fact, I found it the first few years very difficult to write, because writing is a different type of communication than speaking entirely. It's a total different kind of communication. And I wasn't any good at it, and it took me a long time to learn it. And I really didn't enjoy it probably for my first 7 or 8 years, even though I wrote maybe 8 or 9 books. I did it, but I did it because I wanted to influence people that I would never know, or that I would never meet, or never physically be able to touch. So contribution, the law of contribution, is a wonderful law to me, because I realize now how it motivated me to be an author. And another thing that was so interesting in that conversation, when we were talking, he looked at me and said, John, he said, I write to influence people. And I said, then I'm going to write books, because I'd like to do that. And then he said, but let me tell you something else that's going to be very important. He said, don't write to make any money. He said, you won't make any money writing. He says, so don't write to make money. Just write to add value to people. So when you write a book, it's not as an income source. It's just the fact you want to add value to people. And I said, okay, I got that. I got that. I'll never write to make money. Now, little did I know that I might make a little bit of that. They told me recently I've sold over almost 27 million books now. So, that's a lot of books, isn't it? Huh? That's a lot of books. Well, do the math. I've made a little money, okay? But here's what's really incredible. I still don't know for that reason. And when people say, well, what's the best book you've ever written? Well, it's the book I'm writing. That's the best book I've ever written. And in fact, when I'm writing that book, I think, why didn't I write this earlier? This is so good. This is the best I've ever done, which is, really a foolish statement, but I believe it. I just really, and somebody says, well, when will you stop writing? I said, when I don't think that the book I'm writing is the best I've ever done, then I'm going to stop. But the law of contribution is such an incredible law because what it says to me, and the reason I enjoy it so much is grow yourself and then give yourself away. Now, if you'll grow yourself and give yourself away, you'll find that you have more replenishment for self than you could have ever imagined. And so all of my source of energy and all of my source of strength is in the fact that I try to give myself away. And in trying to give myself away, I find myself, and I find myself renewed, and I find myself just refreshed. And so for this lesson, I wrote something that I just wrote it a couple days ago. But it's something that I believed in for a long time, and I thought, I think I want to share this sometime, and here's the day I share it. I want to write to you or share with you my 4 convictions about contribution. There are 4 things I passionately believe in about contribution. And about being a contributor to people and adding value and making a difference in their life. And these 4 are real passions of mine, so let me just share with you, and perhaps 1 or 2 of them might catch on in your life also. And the first one that I really believe, just a major conviction, is this. Everyone has something to give. There's no such thing as a person that has nothing to give. And so I would begin this teaching basically by saying, since that's true that everyone has something to give, start giving. Start giving. And I'm not talking about particular money. That's only one form of giving. And in fact, I had an amazing experience one time, many, many years ago. I was a pastor in Lancaster, Ohio, and young, 26, 27. And the church was really becoming dynamic. In fact, by the time I was 29, it was the 10th largest church in America. And I was coming into this congregation. It had been flat for about 16 years, had not grown, kind of a dead-looking outfit. And so I began to just literally inject enthusiasm and faith, and I began to train leaders. And I was extremely busy in those first 18 months just trying to stop the congregation from going down more, flatten out and turn around. What I've always said is the greatest test of your leadership ability is to take something going down and stop it. Flatten it out, and then turn around. I call it the U-turn. If you can take something going down, stop it, flatten, and bring it back up, you're going to be highly successful. Make sense? And so that's what I'm in the middle of that U. I'm stopping that negative momentum and kind of getting around, turning around, extremely busy. And I saw that on my calendar one day was a person who was going to see me, and his name was Brent. And I didn't know who he was, and so I went to my assistant. I said, I'm supposed to see this gentleman, and I don't know him. And she said, I know. She said, he's been very kindly persistent for about 3 months that he wants to see you. And I said, well, what do you know about him? And she said, well, he's just a member of the congregation. I said, well, is he like a leader in the congregation? She said, no, he shows no leadership at all. And I said, Eileen, I'm trying to build a congregation. And I've got to put my time with the people that are going to give me the greatest return. And I sadly, I just kind of I started saying in a nice way, but I'm not sure how nice I was. But I said, I really don't want to see this guy. But it's on the books, so I'll see him. So needless to say, the day that he came into the office, my attitude wasn't really that good. And so he came in and he sat down, and so I looked at him in a kind of a really ridiculous way and a condescending way. I said, okay, what can I do for you? And he looked at me and he had a little kind of a surprise. He said, well, nothing, I don't think. I said, okay. I said, then why are you here? Well, he said, I had hopes that I could do something for you. I said, okay. I said, what could you do for me? Well, he said, I'm watching what's happening in our congregation, and I'm so thrilled. I'm just amazed. I've seen things that I would have never believed I could see. And he says, I'm just so happy, and I'm not a leader, and I'm not a key person in your congregation. And I keep asking myself, I've been asking myself for months, what can I do to help him? Because I've got to add value to him. And what can I do to help him? And to be honest with you, I kept coming up with blanks, what can I do? And he said, a couple of months ago, I got an idea. And he said, I'd like to share with you the idea, and maybe if you like it, I'll help you. And by this time, my attitude's starting to change. And so, yeah, okay, what would you like to do? Well, he said, you're so busy. I would like to do errands for you. He said, do you have to get your car washed? Yeah, well, of course, dry clean. Yeah, and so he made a list of things that we all have to do. And yeah, sure. He said, could I come in every Thursday about noon? And if you'd have a list of all the things you wanted to have done, I'll learn real quickly where your dry cleaners are and all those things. If you would just give me a list every Thursday, just give it. I don't want to ever bother you. In fact, he said, I may never ever talk to you again. But he said, if I could just have a list, I would like to come by and I would like to do your errands for you so that would relieve you of maybe a couple, 3 hours of things that you could then give more time to the leaders of the congregation. And I began to just weep because I looked at this beautiful person, this beautiful human being who understood the law of contribution a lot better than I understood it. And he believed that everybody has something to give. And he was raising his hand and said, I think what I could do is I can give you Thursday afternoon and I can do errands for you and I'll be glad to do these things. And that way you won't have to do the small stuff so you could do the big stuff. And I looked at him and I said, well, I'd love for you to do that for me. Would it really be big for me? But I said, before I say yes to this, I've got to apologize. I said, I had a bad attitude. You're not a leader, Brent, in the congregation. And I kept kind of wanting to get to the big people. And I said, today I've learned that, that I've got to be real careful, that everybody's got something to add value to me in my life. And that marked me that day. That marked me as a leader. I said, I'll never do that again. I'll never, a lot of my learning, truthfully, hasn't been through brilliance. A lot of my learning has been through mistakes. Does this make sense to you? I wish I could tell you I just kind of was brilliant and figured it out, but I don't figure it out until I just kind of fall. And then I go, whoops, I'm on the ground. Oh, my gosh. I'm eating dirt right now. Oh, Lord, this is not where I'm supposed to be. How do I pick myself up? How do I turn this around? But that day, Brent Johnson taught me that everybody has something to give. And so I would say to every one of you here, I would say to a lot of you you're on this online university and you're taking this for yourself and you're growing yourself. Congratulations. I would just say that everybody has something to give. And if you'll just get creative, it's amazing what you can do that can really make a difference. We think of IOUs, we know what IOUs are, but Brent that day, he gave me a DTU, a duty totally unexpected. He did something for me that day that I just thought, oh my gosh, I didn't have a clue how much I needed somebody like you. And we became good friends. In fact, it's very interesting. After we not only became very good friends, but his wife became my assistant later on and helped me tremendously in many areas. But everybody has something to give. So if we're not giving, if we're not contributing, it's not that we don't have something to give. It's another issue. Number two, my second conviction about contribution is this, that you do for one what you wish you could do for many. That in a leadership role, what happens is it's impossible sometimes for us to meet all the needs and do things for everybody. And when we become a leader and we build large organizations especially, we become a little bit overwhelmed and we can't get around to all of them. And so when you think of contribution, just think of this, do for one what you wish you could do for many. They asked Mother Teresa one time, they said, "Oh my God, you're amazing. How do we feed the world?" And she said, "Start with one. Start with one. Just you know what I mean. Don't try to feed with, stay in your own backyard. Stay in your own neighborhood." And I try to do that in the John Maxwell team with my faculty. I mentor them. Every other month we spend time together, and I mentor them because they reach so many. If I can just help a few of them, that reaches me. Mark Cole, who's my CEO in the company, he handles the leadership lane. And he literally talks to and influences hundreds and thousands of people. And so when Mark and I are together, we're together an awful lot. I'll do mentoring and I'll do teaching, and he'll be over there taking notes. And what he'll do is he'll grab all that stuff, and then he'll get on that Tuesday call, and he'll start sharing with them. Here's what I learned this week from John. Here's what and what I'm doing for Mark. What I wish I could do for many. And I would encourage you to do the very same thing. I would encourage you to look around and say, okay, I can't take care of everybody. I can't spend time with everybody, but who could I spend time with? That if I spent time with them, it could be passed on. It could be multiplied. It could go right on down to a whole bunch of people. It's a great contribution principle. The third one, and this one I just dearly love. Be the first to help. Just be the first to help. Because everybody is waiting for somebody to step up. Isn't that true? I mean, when there's a need, everybody's kind of looking around, who's going to step up? And what I'm going to say to you is, since everybody's looking for somebody to step up, you be that person. I mean, just step up. Because stepping up first sets you apart from everyone else. And if you really want to contribute, if you really want to add value to people, be ready at all times to step up. And when I think of people in my life, this is so beautiful. When I think of people that were the first to step up, I could give you 100 times in my life and 100 names of people that stepped up first to help me. But can I tell you something? I couldn't give you one of the second person who stepped up. I can remember the first one, but the second and the third one, I don't remember them. But it's that first one to step up and say, "Hey, John, can I help you?" I was only a sophomore in high school when my basketball coach literally told the rest of the team, this is unusual. John's only a sophomore, but he's going to be the captain this year of the team. And I remember I was sitting on that hardwood floor, and I was shocked. I thought, why am I going to be the captain of the team? And it's like he read my mind and said, John's going to be the captain of the team, because John just absolutely gives enthusiasm to the whole team. And he just said, I know he's the youngest, but he's going to be the captain. He's still alive, and when I go around Circleville, Ohio, where I grew up, a lot of times I'll look him up and we'll eat together, and I'll say, "Coach, you were the first one to recognize me in front of others as a leader. You have no idea what you did for me when you recognized me as a leader." He was the first one to step up. But guess what? There's been a few others step up and say, "I'm a leader." But he was the first one to step up. And I remember walking across a campus on college, and Paul Dorsey stopping me and saying, "John, I know, I've watched your life for these last couple years." And he said, I just think that I think God's got great plans for you. He said, I think that he's got an open book for you. And I think he's writing all kinds of things that he believes that you're going to do. And I just want to be the first to tell you that even though you're 21 years of age, I see greatness in you. And I remember walking away from him, and thinking, wow, he sees greatness in me. Now, there's been a few other people that say I'm okay. But he was the first one. He was the first one. And I remember when I finally, after Les Parrott said he wrote books to add value to people, I said, okay, I'm going to write a book. And then I thought, well, who's going to publish this book? And I'll never forget. Les Parrott brought a guy by the name of Bud Lund, who was a publisher out of Kansas City. And we sat down and had dinner. And Bud said, Dr. Parrott says that you would like to write a book. I said, well, yeah, I'd like to influence some people, And he said, I just wanted to let you know I'll publish it for you. I said, you're kidding. And then I said, well, how much is it going to cost me? He said, nothing. He said, I'll do it for you free. I'll just publish it for you. I said, for free? You're going to publish a book? Little did I know that if you're good, you could get royalties and advances. I knew nothing. But I was just so happy. He was the first. And by the way, I have had major royalty advances in my life, okay? Major ones. But no publisher ever touched me like Bud Lund did. Because he was the first one to say, guess what? I'll publish you. He published with me when only my mother would buy my book. Huh? He was the first to step up. I can remember being in Canada and having breakfast with Tom Phillippe, and I was now in my 30s, and Tom looked at me and said, John, he said, we've only known each other for a few months, but I just want you to know you're going to be very successful. And he said, one of the things you're going to find with being successful is people are going to come to you with different agendas. And you're going to sometimes wonder who you can trust. And I just want you to know that I'm going to be a trustworthy friend of yours, and I'll never violate you. And I remember thinking, two things. I remember thinking, that was really wonderful. And I remember thinking, wow, he's kind of a suspicious guy, isn't he? Huh? Because I'm just a kid, and I'm very trusting, and I'm just kind of thinking everybody's going to love my success, and everybody's going to get excited, and certainly nobody's ever going to come with a jaded agenda, and I'm just kind of like a happy, stupid person. And he said, I just want you to know you'll be able to trust me all your life. And he's still alive. I was in Indianapolis, Indiana last year, and I went in to see him for a couple of hours. His health is failing him some. And I just got to love on him and say, you have been a trustworthy friend. And I watched him fight battles for me, because when I was young and successful, there were a lot of battles. And I just watched him. He was the first one to say, listen, I'm going to be your trustworthy friend. Kurt Kampmeyer was the first one to talk to me about personal growth, first one to step up. I can still remember being in Nashville with Sam Moore, who owned the publishing company I was working with at that time, and he had brought a doctor with him, a cardiologist, and he said, this is Dr. John Bright Cage, and I met him, and he said he reads a lot of your stuff, and he asked me the other day when I was in the office, I asked him, what can I do for you? He said, I'd like to meet John Maxwell. So he said, I brought him to lunch to meet you, and I said, that's great. So we had a great conversation, and I'll never forget, towards the end of the conversation, Dr. Gage looked at me and said, John, he said, you're not healthy. And he said, I want to give you my card, because he said, I just want you to call on me if you ever get in trouble. Just call on me. I'll help you. And I thanked him and told him I was in good health and all the assumptive, arrogant things a person can say, and took his card and literally handed it to Linda, my sister, and said, well, there's some doctor in Nashville, gave me the card and said if I ever needed help, just call him. Little did I know that 6 months later I was going to have a heart attack. I was going to be in the middle of the night in a hospital that couldn't do a heart cath, and my life was going to be right on the edge. Linda Eggers got on the phone and called that number at 2 o'clock in the morning, and by 3 o'clock, he had arranged the best team in Atlanta to take care of me, and they saved my life. He was the first to step up and help. He and Dr. Marshall, the one that was the lead of the team. In fact, when Dr. Marshall met me at Emory and with his team and said, I don't know who you are, but you got to be important. We all got out of bed for you. And they did a heart cath on me, did some procedure that that Dr. Marshall had just invented in the last year. And it saved my life. And this is a side story. So 10 years later, I wanted to thank them. So we were still living here in Atlanta. So my guy that helps me writing, Charlie was is a New Orleans chef, and so I said, Charlie, I need you to cook a special meal for me, and had some wonderful friends. I had a lovely place, and so I invited Dr. Marshall and Dr. John Bright Cage and their spouses, and they came over, and we had a dinner together. And a wonderful time, and at the end of the dinner, I gave them a letter that I had written, and the bottom line on the letter was basically, thank you for saving my life. And then what I did is I said, 10 years after you saved my life, here are some of the things that I've been able to do. And I began to share with them all the things that I was able to do. And we laid our heads on the table and just wept. And they were the first to help. The law of contribution says that if you're just ready to help and you quickly serve without hesitation, you'll begin to set yourself apart from other people. And that's why I love this law. It's a law that all of us can do well in if we just are ready to serve. The last thought I want to give you on my convictions about contribution is that you and I are to be a river, not a reservoir. And that I believe that God will only give to us what he knows will flow through us. He doesn't give me gifts and talents for me. He doesn't give me gifts and talents so that I can use them for personal advantage. He gives me gifts and talents so that I can make a difference in people's lives. And that's why I'm here. That's why you're here, to make a difference in people's lives. I think I'll close with this beautiful story about a young lady who lives in Paraguay. Her first name is Gabby. And so Gabby, she became a John Maxwell coach. And she came up to me after the first time that she heard me talk about making a difference in the lives of countries and transforming countries. And she happened to be there when I kind of talked about my dream of, you see, on my bucket list, my big bucket list thing is I would like to live long enough to see one country transformed. Just totally, beautifully, wonderfully transformed. So I cast this amazing vision, and she came up to me afterwards and introduced herself. I mean, there was a lot of people, and she had a passport, and she said, could you just sign my passport? I never had anybody ask me to sign a passport. She said, could you put one word in my passport? And I said, yeah. And so I wrote the word transformation and handed it back to her, and I said, why don't you go back to Paraguay and help change your country? She's just a little gal. She looked at me and said, I think I'll do that. I think I'll do that. She went back and she sat down with her husband, Tim, and she told him the story, and she said, I think we should be catalysts for transforming Paraguay. He said, well, how are we going to do that? She said, I don't know, but we're going to do it. And so they came back 6 months later, and she brought up one of my books, and she said, would you sign this for the president of our country? And she gave me the name. I said, sure, I'll sign it for. And I looked at her, I said, do you know the president of Paraguay? She said, no. I said, okay. I said, then why did I sign the book? She said, I want to give it to him. So I'm good. But you don't know him? No. And then she looked at me, she said, I'm going to help transform my country. And I'll figure out a way. And she went back, and within about a month after that time, she did figure out a way, and she literally went to see him and met him and gave him that book and said, if you'll read this book, this will kind of get the start. I'd like to see our country transformed. And so he read it. She went back to him and to his people and said, why don't we write a letter to John Maxwell and ask him to come and be a catalyst for changing our country. And sure enough, he wrote that. And about 8 months later, I'm in the president's office. And he's not understanding my English really, really well. And we don't have a translator. And it's going good, but it's not going great. It's not going great. It's not going what it needs to be. And all of a sudden, this little gal, she just gets on the edge of her seat and she starts speaking fast in Spanish. And she becomes very passionate. And I realize that she's casting vision to the president of how a country could be changed. And he gave me the invitation to come and do that. And so, 120,000 people trained later, lives being changed, Supreme Court, cabinets, people in high positions absolutely making a difference in this country. And every time I go down to do transformation, I have Gabby with me, and I'll look at her and I'll say, Gabby, this wouldn't happen if it weren't for you. We wouldn't be training all these high schools if it weren't for you. We wouldn't put these materials in the hand of every teacher in the public school system if it wasn't for you. Gabby, it all started with you. The law of contribution just basically says, jump in and help. And as I look at you today, and as I look at you that you're watching online, I just have a question for you. I have a question for you. I have a question for all of us. And the question is, where's the next Gabby? Where's the next one? Who's going to step up next and say, you know what? I think I want to make a difference. And what was so beautiful about this young lady is she had no resources and had no position, had no title, but she had a passion to make a difference. And she's literally saying, and I will predict that in about 4 years, we will have 10% of that country that have gone through leadership valued roundtables. And it'll all be because of Gabby understanding the law of contribution. And every time I see her, I look at her and I say, you inspire me. You inspire me. It's within you. It's within me to make a difference.